this extraordinary effort. And the most important question, because we have to ask, because we want to make sure we have a good impression of the Robert Jackson Center to our guests, but how was Scott Sawyer?
He was wonderful. He's full of information about the region. Every time we'd pass, through the Seneca Reservation or through a town, he filled me in on everything. So I learned about Lucille Ball and all these things that I needed to learn about, and he was great.
Well, that's great. Now I can report back well. Jack, just get to your book, and I right here, for those, this is being recorded, The Nazi and the Psychiatrist. I found fascinating the book cover. The book cover, how you could fold it, and when you pull it apart, it's identical breaks on both sides. What's the significance?
Well, the book cover is mirroring the effect of the Rorschach ink blot test. So a lot of people have heard of that, but it's the kind of test that that Dr. Douglas Kelley, who is the subject of my book, used when he was examining the German defendants at that first International Military Tribunal. And so it involves showing the subject cards with ink blots on them, so they're abstract images. They don't show anything representational, and asking the subject, what do you see here? And it was thought at the time that this has value because since there was nothing representational, then anything the subject would say would be a projection of their inner self. And Dr. Kelley put a great deal of stock in this test. It's not used anymore the way that he used it to diagnose psychiatric illnesses, but the cover is a salute to that. It also reminds me of, I don't know if you ever were a reader of Mad Magazine in the 60s and 70s. So there was that back cover, the inside back cover that you folded, and it made it a completely different image. It sort of reminds me of that too, which I like.
Well, it captures you when you really pay attention to it, and so for those who buy it, take a look at it. Dr. Kelley was assigned to Mondorf Palace, the ash can, and I'm not sure I understood how he was assigned, how he was selected to go to that special place, which was the holding center for the Nazi prisoners.
Well, it was certainly mysterious to Dr. Kelley, too, why he got this assignment. But I think it was because he was available. He was nearby. He had been working in various field hospitals in Western Europe during the war, treating soldiers who had what today we would call PTSD, and having some success in treating them. And so when the war ended, he was there. He was relatively of high rank, and he was well thought of. And I think that's the main reason. He was also relatively young. He was only 33. So I think it was just a lot of things coming together, some of it just having to do with his availability and luck, because it certainly was a very big thing to happen in his career as a psychiatrist.
So he's at the ash can, and we had an opportunity early on at the Jackson Center to interview John Delebois, who subsequently became Ambassador Delebois, who also was at ash can,
yes.
I think ostensibly as a welfare officer, but really was gathering information. That's where they connected?
Yes, and Delebois also helped Kelley with translations because Kelley arrived there not knowing any German at all. And so he depended on Delebois and also another translator named Howard Trieste to help him with the prisoners who didn't speak English. And this even included administering tests, like the Rorschach. Several of the defendants could only, of course, answer in German, and then Delebois or Trieste would translate, and Kelley would make what he did, make of it from that. So these men were really helpful to him.
So he's assigned to Ashcan. At what point do you get a sense that Dr. Kelley felt like this could be something in his best interest, aside from perhaps the welfare of but potentially gathering information which would be in his discipline to understand how the Nazi mind worked?
Oh, Kelley thought about this very quickly because he realized that he was in a position that was the envy of probably hundreds of other psychiatrists around the world, to be among these men who were considered the arch criminals of the 20th century. And so he had this exclusive access that he wanted to make the most of. So when Kelley came to Mondorf, he was told, your job, the court wants him to examine these men to see if they're fit for trial mentally. That's a really low bar. That legal fitness is a low bar of mental fitness. And Kelley was ambitious and strong-willed, and he wanted to make more of this time. And he wanted to work on a project of his own devising that he kept to himself for a long time, of determining whether these men shared a psychiatric disorder of some kind that accounted for their criminal behavior and heinous acts before and during the war. So that's what he set out to do. And then soon after that, he developed the idea of writing a book about this experience when he returned to the States, which he did in 1947, 22 cells in Nuremberg.
Was it at Mondorf, do you get a sense that he and Goering connected, which kind of continued on and when they were transferred to Nuremberg, or did that kind of happen later on in the relationship?
No, it began quickly. They developed a quick connection because Goering needed Kelley. Goering, at the time of his arrest, had health problems. He was suffering from what Goering perceived as heart problems, and then he was addicted to a narcotic called pericodine. And the last thing the Allies wanted was for Goering to die before the trial started. And so Kelley put Goering on a fitness campaign, lose a lot of weight, and get off his addiction to pericodine. And that put them very close together right at the start. And it was only after that was dealt with, or maybe while that was being dealt with, that Kelley and Goering began to engage in discussions, because interviewing was a big part of Kelley's project to understand the Nazis. Over time, they recognized that they were similar, both very intelligent, both charming in their own way, both had high opinions of themselves, and both were master manipulators. And I think they recognized this, and I would never call it a friendship between them, but I think a mutual admiration set in that really lasted Kelley's entire time there in Mondorf and then later in Nuremberg.
He's kind of confronted, Dr. Kelley, is kind of confronted with an ethical dilemma. You know, in one sense, he's a professional. And I'm sure he probably kind of dealt with the fact, is he an agent of the prison, or is he a protector of the prisoners? You know, what is it that he's got?
This is a really important question, because Kelley was a trailblazer in a sense. He was one of the first, if not the first, military psychiatrists ever put among people suspected of war crimes in this way. So he had to sort out who his allegiances were to. He did have a normal doctor-patient relationship with some of the defendants. He treated them, not for psychiatric problems, but for other physical kinds of ailments. So there is a responsibility to his patients. He was an officer in the U.S. Army. He had a responsibility to the military. He had been brought into all this by the court, so he had felt a responsibility to them. And then the prosecution also asked Kelley to help out by providing information, things that the defendants, especially Goring, had told him during their interviews. And in the end, he decided to cooperate in this. And so I feel for Dr. Kelley in this. I think had this happened now, I don't think his behavior would have been very admirable. But back then, it was a confused situation. And I think he managed it as best as anyone could.
On his confusing situation, the chaos that occurred, it was going on in Nuremberg, I draw an analogy to the chaplains that were there. Henry Garricky and Father Sixtus O'Connor, who were chaplains, but they too had a dilemma whether they were to proselytize or just simply be available. You know, this dilemma. And what's the self-interest of all this stuff? So did he have much relationship with kind of the other staff members, the chaplains as well? You know, because they were dealing with the kind of defendants on a religious basis.
I don't think he had a close relationship with them on the staff, but he mentions them occasionally and was aware of what they were doing. It's interesting to me that there were two defendants who Kelley especially disliked. One of them was Albert Speer, because Kelley felt that Albert Speer was hypocritical in his insistence that he felt remorse, etc., yet he didn't own up during this time to his entire involvement in the Nazi regime. But another of those defendants that he disliked was Hans Frank, who, with Father O'Connor's help, had undergone I don't know if conversion is the right word, but a reawakening of his Catholic identity. And Kelley was very suspicious of this and thought that it too was hypocritical. And so I didn't find anything closely connecting Kelley with those two men, with the two ministers, but he was certainly aware of what they were up to.
The prosecutors of those two, the prosecuting staff, they were wondering what they were doing, you know, sort of proselytizing. How could you do that? I wondered if similarly the staff had such thoughts about a psychiatrist in Kelley and a psychologist in Gustav Gilbert. You know, like, what is this? Is it voodoo? What are you guys doing with Rorschach?
Right. Well, many wondered what Kelley was doing there, and later Gilbert, what he was doing there. But I think the staff, after a while, began to rely on these mental health professionals because as things developed, one problem in the jail was keeping certain of these defendants from killing themselves. And so the psychiatrist, the psychologist could presumably play a role in that. As it happened, Kelley did not suspect that Robert Ley would take his own life, and everyone was taken aback by that. But that was one of the reasons how the staff could justify the presence of these men.
And he previously had lost the Dr. Lucian Conti, who was a material witness. You know, all that. Dr. Kelley and Goering were personalities. And did you get a sense of that relationship that each was playing off the other, perhaps with their self-interest? And there were some examples in the book, which were a terrific book, by the way.
Thank you.
Talking about how Kelley helping Goering stay in touch with his wife and daughter, doing something outside the norm.
So,
Was that all part of that?
yes, they were each aware of the manipulating that the other was doing, because each of them could get something from the other that they wanted. So, for instance, Goering, as you mentioned, wanted to hear from his wife and daughter. He wanted to know what was happening with them. There was a time when they were both in prison, and he wanted to know why and to see if they could get out. And Kelley delivered letters between Goering and his family, and did get involved in Goering's family relationship. And Kelley, what he could get from Goering was access and insight into this man's mind. So they talked a lot about things that had nothing to do with Goering's mental health or mental state. They talked about why Goering broke treaties and why he bombed Rotterdam, and why the Germans broke their treaties, and whether Goering was anti-Semitic. Goering denied being anti-Semitic, but I would take that with a big boulder of salt. And this was the kind of interviewing and interaction that Kelley really wanted, and Goering was willing to give it to him as long as the quid pro quo was in force and he could get access to his family.
What became clear is Dr. Kelley was spending a majority of his time with Goering, but at the same time, he was responsible for the 20 other defendants as well. How did he allocate his time, and did you get a sense of that? Because I got to believe that Burton Andrus would at some point say, gee, you're really focused on one guy to the exclusion of others.
Yes, Andrus was the commandant of the prison and jail in Nuremberg. Well, a lot of how Kelley allocated his time was just based on circumstance. So, for instance, some of the defendants spoke good English, and some didn't. Kelley did not know any German, so with the ones who didn't speak English, he had to rely on translators, and that was just another barrier to understanding. So I think he tended to favor the ones who spoke fluent English. And then there were some of the defendants, like Julius Streicher and Alfred Rosenberg, certainly psychiatrically interesting people, but they were open. They did not try to hide their beliefs or their convictions or their motivations or any of that. And Kelley spent a fair time with the two of them, and it was appealing to him how much of an open book each of those guys were. So I don't think he had a plan, I'm going to spend more time with this group and less with that group, but there were circumstances that made that happen.
I hopefully can share the one story with about Streicher, because Kelley did not speak German. He needed a translator, Howard Trieste, who came on after Dulla Boys, and who also came to the Jackson Center. We had a chance to interview him. But he had a story about Streicher being so prideful in identifying Jewish people. And here, at one point, I'm envisioning a meeting where there's Streicher, Kelley, and Trieste. Can you tell that story?
Yes. Howard Trieste was working there as a translator under this great strain, because many people in the prison, including all the defendants, didn't know his background, which was that he grew up in Germany. He was a German Jew from a German Jewish family, and his family had sent him away when he was young to the U.S., and so he spent formative years in the United States. And the second he could join the U.S. Army to fight back against the Nazis, he did. And he found himself in the presence of these leaders who had masterminded all the torments that his family suffered. And so in Howard's mind, should I tell them that I am Jewish? Especially Stryker and a couple of the others who claimed they could easily identify Jews from a mile away. And in the end, Howard decided not to. And I think that was the right decision, not for their sake, but for his own sake, not to get entangled with them that way. But there were many weird, awkward, just strange moments between Kelley, people like Stryker, and the translators that I don't think anyone could make up. And fortunately, Kelley recorded many of those in his book, many of them also in the notes that I had access to through Dr. Kelley's son, and so they're in my book as well.
What is interesting, and maybe it's ahead of the conversation, but that when Kelley left in December of 1945, he decided, for reasons of his own, to package up all of his files, notes, some X-rays perhaps of Hitler's, brain, stuff like that. I mean, was that think that was a knee-jerk reaction, or was that something that he was going to grab it for a book to be written later?
Well, the book was certainly on his mind as he packaged up all this stuff, but also I think he thought it was his. I don't know whether it was his legally. These were government documents, court documents. I don't know if he had the right to take these papers with him, but he did. And seeing those papers, 15 banker's boxes full of them, is what got me started in being interested in this story, because I had, through earlier research, heard of Dr. Kelley and decided to go searching for his family members to see what they had. And his Dr. Kelley's son, Doug, invited me over to take a look. And when I got there, Doug had dragged up from his basement these 15 boxes, and it was overwhelming. I remember just opening the lid of the first box, and right on top there was this jewelry case, like a felt-lined jewelry case, maybe for a bracelet or a necklace. And inside was a glass vial with all these red pills in it, and it was labeled Hermann Goring's Paracodine. And that was my introduction, really, to this whole story. And I knew quickly that these boxes could be the foundation of a really intriguing nonfiction story.
And then just a postscript, I know Kelley was able to interview Dr. Karl Brandt, Hitler's physician, and actually somehow he extracted X-rays of Hitler. His skull.
Yeah, that was another, big envelope with these odd X-rays in them labeled Hitler's skull that were among the things in these boxes. And these X-rays came from the Middle War years, maybe 1943, if I remember right, when Hitler had a bad sinus infection and his head was X-rayed to see what was going on. Brandt had them with him, and I don't know what Kelley said to him to inspire him to pass them along, but he did, and those were there.
It's remarkable. Now, in your book, you talk about there was a potential collaboration of a book based on the psychiatrist Kelley and the psychologist Gustav Gilbert, that clearly when Kelley left, it infuriated Gilbert because he took all the goodies. Could you talk a little bit about that relationship?
They were
Kelley's and Gilbert?
yes, Kelley and Gilbert were different kinds of men and medical professionals. Kelley was a psychiatrist. Gilbert was a PhD psychologist, more of an academic than Kelley was. They relied on some of the same types of testing. Gilbert also used Rorschach testing and came to different conclusions. Kelley's conclusions, and this was all part of his search to find some shared psychiatric disorder that the defendants might have had. Kelley's conclusion was no, they didn't have a psychiatric disorder. They're essentially normal. And that really turned Kelley's beliefs about his profession upside down, because he felt he could no longer depend on psychiatry to help us understand people like that. And he concluded that if they were normal, then there must be around us, among us, all the time, in every country, every era, people like that. Doesn't mean everyone's like that, but there are people like that who are capable of such narcissism and opportunism and lack of conscience and remorse. And that we need, the end of the war wasn't going to put an end to their activities. The trials were not going to put an end to their activities because they're everywhere. And that we need to guard against them. And Kelley even developed in his book a plan to safeguard our democracy from this kind of incipient fascism, which he, with changed eyes, he saw in the U.S. when he returned, especially in the segregated South. And so it set him in a new direction. Gilbert, on the other hand, looked at some of the same data and saw that, believed that some of the Nazis were psychotic, could be identified as having psychiatric illnesses. And so there is a basic conflict in the conclusions that they came to. As it turned out, Gilbert's conclusions were much more palatable to the public after the war than Kelley's were.
And that was the book Nuremberg Diary?
Yes.
Yeah, so that's Gilbert's book. Back to Nuremberg itself, one of the things that is most dramatic is Kelley, Goring, and Hess, and amnesia. And clearly throughout the trial is the mental state of Rudolf Hess. How did Kelley come down on that?
Hess's case is very interesting. He was a latecomer among this group of defendants because early in the war he had, on his own initiative, flown a plane from Germany to Scotland in the hopes of brokering a peace between Germany and the UK so that they could join forces and fight Russia. But the British, by that time, had no interest in any of that and locked him up for the duration of the war. During that time, locked up in Britain, he started displaying some strange behaviors. For instance, he often believed the British were trying to poison him. And one of the items that I found in those 15 bankers' boxes in Doug Kelley's home was a wrapped sample of cookies that Hess had refused to eat because they were poisoned, he believed. And I did not unwrap them or anything like that. I didn't know what I would find 65-year-old cookies. But eventually, once the trial was about to start, Hess was brought to Nuremberg. And he was feigning, jumping the gun a little there, he did say he was suffering from amnesia. And in one really dramatic moment, and this is in the film Nuremberg as well, Hess claimed not to recognize Hermann Goring, and which outraged Goring. How could someone not recognize him? or remember him. And so the trial started. Hess kept this up. But then early on in the trial, he announced to the court that he was faking it and that he really did have a memory of what happened in Germany. How did Kelley come down on this? Kelley had not believed Hess from the start, had not believed in Hess's amnesia from the start. And he believed it was a ploy to divert any judgment of guilt against him.
Yeah, I'm just reading briefly in the book. Hess bragged to his attorney that he had made Kelley and Gilbert look ridiculous because they believed in his amnesia. Hess continued his elated recounting of the day's events and da-da-da-da-da. And then explained to Kelley, how did I do? Good, wasn't I? I mean, he was really pretty proud of himself. And it's all on there. It's captured on video as not only Nuremberg, but we've got at the Jackson Center the actual trial transcripts of that.
Yeah,
and as an aside, one of the things we have in our archives, we actually had, when Hess and Goering met and they brought in other people to try to jog Hess's memory, his teacher and all that other stuff.
Yes.
The actual transcriber, Richard Sonnenfeld, he was actually at the center, explained this whole, we have that, and the attorney with Eamon was also at the center, so they kind of back up everything you've said. It just was wild.
I wish I had seen that material, though, for my book. I'm sorry that I didn't consult with your collection here.
Well, Elizabeth can show you after the fact. If Kelley, if you had to interview Kelley, and by the way, we also have in our archives a brief 4-minute audio broadcast of him in 1945, so maybe they'll share it with you. But if you had to interview Douglas Kelley, what would you ask him? And what do you think his response might be about this episode in his life? I mean, albeit really about 6 months, but his episode. What do you think? How would you react?
Well, we know his short-term reaction with certainty, which because he lived it. And after he came back from Nuremberg, he had this professional upheaval, wondering whether psychiatry could explain the things that he thought were important. Over time, he began a turn to criminology, a social science instead of a medical science, to try and explain criminal behavior. And then he began drinking heavily. His marriage was on the rocks, and he also believed the U.S. government was persecuting him as part of the McCarthy era and the campaigns against communists. Kelley was not a communist, but even so, he believed that he had been caught up in that. So that was his short-term reaction, and then he took his own life. Had he lived beyond that and gotten a longer-term perspective, I think he would have come to see how important and powerful the information was that he had gathered about the defendants, because he arrived at critically important insights. I think in the years after Nuremberg, we've seen many war crimes committed, crimes against peace, genocides, and had Dr. Kelley been able to get his ideas out there more, we may have fared better in those instances after the war. So I think he would have felt pride, or I guess what I'm saying is he should have felt pride instead of the depression that this whole experience put him into.
During this time, he was at the Mondorf and then subsequently at the Nuremberg. He wrote memos and did various things, which were files. Do you get a sense that the Nuremberg prosecutors, headed by our guy, Justice Robert Jackson, ever really got a hold of those, used those for the advancement of the Nuremberg prosecution?
All of the memos that I saw that Kelley wrote to the prosecution were addressed to William Donovan, and then he left at some point. So I don't know who is really looking at this information after Donovan. And I would think that what Kelley told them, especially about Goring and what Goring was planning for his own defense, would have been useful. In the movie's telling of the story, it definitely was useful. So it's hard for me to say how useful that was to the prosecution as a whole.
Thank you for coming today. Tonight, you're going to see the movie for the nth time.
Fourth.
Fourth time, okay. Given that your book, The Nazi and the Psychiatrist, was the basis, a firm basis upon which the movie was added, and of course it becomes a little bit Hollywoodized. How did you see how they did from the Hollywood to your book? Were they pretty good on it?
Well, I think a movie and a book have to be judged differently when it comes to historical accuracy. I had the chance to see 4 drafts of the screenplay over many years, and this took a long time to happen. So I saw it develop, and I was able to make comments on it. And by and large, I didn't see my role as the history police to correct inaccurate things in the screenplay. There are some, but I'm happy with the film because I think overall it is essentially factual, which means mostly factual, and I'm glad that it delivers the messages that were in my book that are important to me, and those mostly have to do with the lessons that we can and should take from this whole experience.
What is the lesson?
Well, there are 2 that there are probably a lot, but there are 2 that I like to think of. One has to do with the nature of an international tribunal and how remarkable it was, and this was Justice Jackson's concept for the victors, the 4 nations, to come together and instead of shooting the defeated by firing squad, to stage a trial, which was not perfect, but did serve to get the evidence out there and to require the defendants to put up a defense and to see what that was. So it was very important in shaping public opinion because of the evidence that was presented. But we're in a different situation now. The United States is not a supporter of the International Criminal Court. In fact, we sanction judges in the court who come to decisions we don't like. And so our country is now playing a different role. And I think this is a tragedy. I would like to see us return to that earlier role we played in Nuremberg. And then the second lesson has to do with the motivations of men like this and how this was not some distinctively German thing. These men were not monsters. Monsters aren't responsible for what they do. These men made choices, and they should be held responsible for their choices. And we can apply what we learned about them back then to people we encounter in our lives now. We should keep that in mind and maybe follow some of Dr. Kelley's suggestions for preserving our own democracy and protecting it against authoritarianism.
Well, you had a choice of whether or not to come to the Robert H. Jackson Center on this premiere of this movie, and we're so glad you chose to come.
Oh, I was delighted to be invited. It's a great privilege to be here, and I can't wait to meet the people who will be in the audience and hear what they think of the movie.
Well, terrific. Thank you ever so much. You know, Jack, I really enjoyed your book, and
thank you.
Look forward to your next work. Thank you.
Thank you, Greg.